we thank you all very much for coming, and we're really excited to be part of your listening tour. I think you all met the two community members we have here, Rebecca Baruzzi, who's a Mad River Valley
Community
Resource Coordinator, and Robin Morse, local entrepreneur with Mad River Valley Food Hub and Mad River Valley Taste Place. My coworker Jeff Knight, who is roaming around. My other coworker Alicia is right behind you. And we've got one more coworker, Pat, who is the publisher and the co-owner, but she's staying in her office because she doesn't want to get exposed to anyone's cooties. And this is Tony Italiano, who's with Mad River Valley Television, and he's going to film this for the local public access channel. So we've got some prepared questions for you, and Rebecca and Robin have come with some questions, and we've reached out to community members with questions as well. And for those of you who don't know, the Valley Reporter has been publishing and covering the people and places of the Mad River Valley and recording its history since 1971. It was purchased in 1982 by a man named Al Benjamin, a former Boston talking head in the news media business. And he ran it until 2000, when Pat Clark and I were named publisher and editor. And Al died in 2015, and Pat Clark and I became the owner. And we're very dedicated to our community and the goings-on. And so we really appreciate this opportunity. And I'm going to open the questions, unless you guys have questions before we start.
Well, maybe if we could just start with why we're here.
Absolutely.
So this is our 14th stop on this tour, and it's something we started well over a year ago. And it was as a result of some of what I did as Lieutenant Governor, where I did perform an everyday job tour that I went on 35 jobs throughout a number of years. Everything from beekeeping to violin making to working in a distillery to teaching second grade to working in a hospital, and all so that I could keep my finger on the pulse, see what Vermonters were thinking, working in the day in the shoes of someone else. So when I became governor, I thought we ought to do the same type of thing, maybe a little bit different, but many times when we have cabinet meetings every single week. Many governors throughout the country, some don't have them at all, some have them every month, some have them every quarter. I decided we need to keep in touch once a week with the team. And I said on one of the first days having a cabinet meeting that I thought we would be successful when we sit around the table and we're trying to solve each other's problems instead of just highlighting our own. And we've gotten to that point. And this is an opportunity where instead of expecting people to come to us to tell us about their opportunities and their challenges, that we go to them. And it's been extremely powerful. The first one was in Rutland County, and again, we've made our way through the entire state. And we've had opportunities where we've been able to solve issues that people have on the ground that are frustrating, and others that are more long-term, that take a lot of working together. And again, having all the cabinet members there outside of their discipline has given us the opportunity to join forces in some way and work together in order to satisfy our citizens and Vermonters. So it's been we're going to start over. We'll start again soon and start the process going through the 14 counties again. But again, what we're hearing from many is that they're feeling burdened, they're apprehensive, but at the same time, there are so many things that we do well that we've seen. So we want to continue to highlight that and try and do what we can to help in other ways.
That's great. As I said to your cabinet members as they arrived, it's really exciting to have you come to us, and we're really honored that we're a stop on your whistle tour. Is that what it's called? Whistle tour. But it's great. It's a great way. It's very personal, and it's really nice to put names to faces as well. So I'll just launch in, if that's appropriate.
Sure.
Now. And my question is about the Paid Mandatory Family Leave Act, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about it, if you intend to sign it as it currently exists.
Well, it depends on if they follow the path that we're asking them to go on. We think a voluntary paid family or voluntary family leave plan is an approach that's viable for the state. It's something that I worked with New Hampshire Governor Sununu on. Combining forces is the first of its kind in the nation. And from my perspective, we can put a structure into place almost immediately without putting the taxpayers at risk because this is complicated in many different ways. It's because of the payroll tax, and then setting up a structure and a bureaucracy in order to move forward with this. And as I've said to many, if we remember about, I think, Vermont Health Connect, the exchange, and how disruptive that was to the state, it turned Vermont on its head in some respects because of the failure of setting up this IT structure. And that's what it is. It's just an IT structure that distributes or has one place where you can receive your healthcare benefits or purchase them. We would have to, as a bureaucracy, if we moved forward, we would have to come up with our own IT structure to do this. There's not anything off the shelf that exists right now, and when we're talking about numbers, Vermont Health Connect really should challenge about 30 or 40,000 people. This, a paid family leave, is going to touch the lives of maybe 350 to 450,000 people. If we don't get this right, it's going to be extremely disruptive to Vermonters. So, from my perspective, working with an outside entity, like an insurance company of some sort, putting it out to bid, working with another state, making it voluntary, doesn't preclude you from making it mandatory in the future, but it gives us an opportunity to see what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, what we can do, what the needs are, and strictly on a voluntary basis. And we can try this out. We can walk before we run, and if we need to change it, if they want to go to a mandatory system in a few years, that's fine. Use the same structure. But from my standpoint, jumping in to the extreme right off the bat would be a mistake.
And if the legislature did pass such a bill that's mandatory, would you sign it?
Well, we'll see. Again, I'm looking at things in the
Well,
aggregate.
I guess I mean, if the legislature passed a bill that was mandatory employee funded, sorry if I wasn't clear.
Yeah, again, this has passed the House, it's in the Senate now. They're considering all the options. They're starting to see some of the problems that are associated with this as well. I'm not sure what they're going to do. I've been very careful not to use the V word, the veto word this year. I think we share a common goal, and I'm looking for a path to get there. And so I'm still hopeful the Senate will take everything in aggregate, all the policy decisions that have been made. The House passed a budget that was included a lot of some of some of our opportunities as well, some of the bills that we would like to see move forward. So they did that, but they didn't include a number of initiatives, a lot of policy decisions, like the $8 million for water quality wasn't included, that we had included in ours. And there's other policy areas that were not included that they're debating at this point in time. So all told, there's another maybe $120 million more that has to be considered. So I think we have to look in the aggregate. We can't do everything for everyone, and we can't afford another 120 million because it would mean raising taxes on someone in order to accomplish that. So I'm going to again take a look at what's passed, look at the aggregate, and see what we can work and compromise on, and what areas we can't. Obviously, we're not going to agree on everything, but we agree. We have the same goal. We think that a family leave plan of some sort would be beneficial to Vermont. My approach is just let's do it a little more slowly and get more accustomed to it.
Thank you. Katie, did you want to ask a question?
I have a question that might be more directed towards Secretary French about proficiency-based learning and grading. So after reviewing recent proficiency-based grading reports and seeing our own district adapt over time, will the Agency of Education be enacting guidelines to help the other districts in the state transition?
Yeah, I think it's a really important initiative in a lot of ways, but one, and this is Act 77, I think it was passed in 2013 perhaps. It has several parts to it. One of them is proficiency-based learning, not necessarily grading, and then flexible pathways and personalized learning plans. And what we're finding around the state is not everyone's done all three of those things. And to really, I think, to enact the goals of that in terms of personalizing student learning, it requires districts to do all three. So it's really hard to do proficiency-based grading without personalized learning plans and vice versa. So we are taking stock of that. As I travel around on days like today, I see, as I've heard about very uneven implementation around the state. So I think your district has a really far, well-developed sense of how to do that. It'd be really great to sort of identify who those districts are in the state, and then from an agency standpoint, try to scale those across the other parts of the state.
Rebecca.
So I have a question, kind of related
Rebecca,
to.
do you want to give a one-sentence description of what
Who I am? Why am I here?
MRVCRC means? Because I couldn't figure your
I
title
can't
on
even
your
say
placard.
it. So I'm the community resource coordinator. I work with 3 different organizations who saw that it was important to have somebody here in the valley to help people get food stamps, 3 squares, fuel assistance, as well as issues around housing. And I even, so sometimes I work with people, it's a one-time transactional, you're just getting fuel, and then it goes all the way to unpacking and finding out there's some, issues with addiction. And we're working on resumes and housing and the gamut, right? So everything related to human services. And in this position, I get to work with every agency possible, it seems, trying to navigate people and usher them through. And, we certainly have people who are struggling with opioid addictions here. It's very difficult for them to get to the clinic daily and then to do that consistently so they don't have to start over, so they can get to the place where they go to the spoke. But even if they do all that, once they get to the spokes, it's, the spoke, there's nothing around here. We have one doctor in Waterbury who's retiring, not taking more patients. So everything's really related to Berlin. And that, if you don't have a reliable vehicle, getting here and making all that happen is very difficult. But aside from whoever's actually impacted, it's also the families. And so I work closely with the schools, with people who are really struggling, and there are not a lot of resources for the kids. And so, when we have concerns and, talk to folks with DCF, it doesn't seem that they have the staffing to be able to deal with a lot of these issues. And I see this as a huge fallout in the future, these kids who are impacted this way. And I'm wondering if this is, if it's on the radar, and if there's an action, if there's anything being done.
Well, a couple of things, and I'd ask some of the cabinet to weigh in. But the opioid epidemic is something that we take very seriously, and I'll give credit where credit's due. Governor Shumlin highlighted this issue a number of years ago in one of his State of the State addresses, I believe, and it's something that affects all of us in some way. And if we don't think it does, we probably just aren't aware of it, because I believe it does in every family, every community, and it affects our economy as well. So when I came into office, we set up an opioid drug prevention council, people from all walks of life, and had a director appointed, Jolinda LeClaire, who reports directly to me on what's going on in statewide. I was impressed with what they did in Rutland with Project Vision. I think that was the starting point of where we wanted to go statewide with this, and we've learned a lot. When I first came into office, there was a number of people, hundreds of people, waiting for treatment that weren't able to receive the treatment that they needed right at that point in time, particularly in the Chittenden County area. We were able to set up another treatment facility in St. Albans, which took the burden off from Chittenden County, I believe, and we found the benefits of that through some of what you're saying, as well. There were a number of people in the St. Albans area that were traveling either to Chittenden County or to Newport for treatment. And so when they were going to, let's say, Newport, they were traveling 3 to 4 hours every single day to get treatment. It doesn't allow a lot of time to work while they were receiving the treatment. So this was extremely beneficial for them. Reduce the number of people waiting for treatment down to practically zero. But what we're seeing is there are areas that could use more treatment for the reasons you're stating. Now, the ripple effect of this is the kids, and we're seeing more in terms of the Department of Children and Families. The number of cases that they are overseeing has risen. So we, in my budget, we put more money in for more caseworkers in the Department of Children and Families to see if we can help in that regard. At the same time, we're taking a look to see where are those problem areas in terms of treatment and what we can do to satisfy the local communities. So we're doing what we can at this point. Should we be doing more? There's never a lack of opportunity. There's never a lack of more we could be doing, and we're looking for ways of doing that. Anything else in the budget or anything that I've missed?
Well, I would add, and perhaps the other two secretaries can chime in as well, in addition to funding additional positions at the Department of Children and Families, as the governor mentioned, the governor's budget also is making investments in early care and learning. It's very important for children to get a head start and to have quality daycare available to them, because the opioid crisis affects every one of us, right, in some way, from the families to the children to the employers to the community to the education. And I think there is a lot that permeates through the budget and through programs that we've been focusing on for the last 2 years that are impacted by the opioid crisis or we are addressing. And one I think of right offhand, Secretary Sherling, is the recovery, the efforts to develop a workforce within the adults in recovery and get them back into the workforce. So I don't know if there's other things in the economic development arena that...
The bottom line is it's all related. So you look at the state government enterprise and all the various components, but you can't extricate one from the other. Whether it's a solid educational foundation or housing, transportation, job training, business growth, so that and community development, so that all those things work together to create the foundation. And as we travel around with 14 different counties, the themes are similar, but each place is a little bit different. There are challenges reactivating untapped workforce because folks don't have transportation to get to a job, or they can't find housing in close proximity, or childcare and learning is a challenge. So it's really weaving together all of those various policy initiatives a piece at a time to make incremental progress to weave it all together. And the more we focus sort of myopically on one thing being the magic elixir, we drop the other 3 or 4 or 10 or 12 or 15 balls that we're trying to juggle at the same time.
I would just add a couple of things. On the point about needing more treatment providers, one of the initiatives that the Governor's Opioid Coordination Council did, one of the first things they did was hold a workforce summit about how to address this workforce shortage among treatment professionals. And then following, they partnered with providers and the Secretary of State's office, their Office of Professional Regulation, and they went through an emergency rules situation where they brought 10 pages of licensing professional applications down to 1 page. They did a lot of streamlining that allowed for more individuals to become licensed LADCs, licensed alcohol and drug counselors. And we had a press conference about it and invited some providers, and there was each of the providers had 3 or 4 individuals that they were able to now license that they previously couldn't. So that's something that is helping with the workforce front. There was tobacco settlement money secured by the Attorney General last year that was being allocated specifically to the opioid crisis, among which I believe was Secretary Young maybe could confirm, but I believe there is an element of that going to workforce and how we can get more treatment professionals into the state of Vermont, because that is, I think, where you're talking about not having as many providers locally.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would add, it was a great example of working together. Secretary of State's office and the administration worked together in order to provide for licensing or streamlined licensing for those counselors. So it was just a good example of what we can do when we actually pull in the same direction.
Thank you for answering those. And you're right, there has been a lot that has happened here, and I've gone to a couple of the Washington County task force meetings, and it's very impressive, the amount of distance people have really gone. But just from where I stand, it's really fostering.
Yeah.
We need to make sure we have foster families, and people aren't signing up, and there's a reason, and we have to figure that out. It's a big piece. Thanks.
Robin?
So I'd like to talk about housing, if I may.
Sure.
As I started the Food Hub in 2011, I've gone to 10 employees, and every time I've hired a new manager, I've had problems finding housing in the area. And because the housing is expensive, our costs of employment have gone up because you have to pay them more to be able to afford the housing. Airbnb is obviously impacting us to some degree in the valley. And then you see the impact in how we're trying to deal with the school numbers. So not all housing is the right housing. We need to have housing for families. How can the state help the communities accelerate housing solutions? Because I know this is a community issue and we've got to deal with it. But we've just done a grant application for an EV charger, which was Volkswagen money, and the state wants to get more EV chargers, so there's a good program for that. How can there be a good program for housing?
Yeah, well, there's some good news out there, but we have a long ways to go. I think a lot of us have been talking about, from all different walks of life, have been talking about the challenges with housing, particularly workforce housing,
Yeah.
Affordable housing. When I talk with graduates from our universities and colleges and ask them, what can we do to keep you here? Because part of our challenge in Vermont is that we have too few people, and we need more people to satisfy just the open jobs that we have today. There are fewer people working today than there were in 2009. 15,000 fewer people. That's a problem for us, especially because we have jobs open. We just don't have the people to fill them. So when I speak with those who are graduating and ask them, what would it do? What can we do to keep you here? Well, first they need an opportunity. They need a job, a good paying job. Well, in some respects, we have some of those throughout Vermont. We have thousands of jobs open. We just need the people. Secondly, they say we need decent, affordable housing. And I hear that from the workforce all the time. So what we did was, again, looking for ways that we work together, where we share common goals. Went to the legislature last year or the year before in the first session, and presented an opportunity, a bond that would housing bond, a $35 million housing bond. We're starting to see some groundbreaking as a result. The legislature went along with us on this. It's leveraging another $65 million in private funds as well, to make it the single largest investment in housing that Vermont has ever seen, $100 million plus. So that in itself will see some of the benefits as the years go on, because it takes a while to permit and plan and build and so forth. So we're not seeing the benefit yet, but we will. But we need, again, to do more. I have a provision in the budget now, and where we're asking the legislature to look at another sector, look at some of the dilapidated housing that we have in some of our communities. That would be an area that I believe to renovate the existing structures to a level that would, in terms of weatherization and to make sure that the houses are sound, but allow contractors, maybe a small contractor, to buy a house a year or something, put his workforce to good use during those down times, and be able to flip the house so that provide more housing stock within the communities. It would take a tax change in order to do that, and some money in order for us to forward grants for this as well. We're hoping the legislature will still do something in that regard, because I think that would be beneficial along in tandem with the other larger initiative we did last year.
Can I
But
just ask about the contractors? I'm
Sure.
sorry to interrupt. Would those be houses that were flipped and then stayed in some sort of pool of affordable, reasonable workforce housing pool, or would they just go right back into the free market?
Well, it'd be in the free market
They
from
would.
our perspective, but again, I'm all open to suggestions on how that could work. Again, creating to a high enough standard, an efficiency standard that would keep the new homeowner from being burdened with high costs of weatherization. I think that would be good. But again, when I grew up in Barrie. There is a number of different homes there, beautiful homes that have fallen in disrepair. And I believe that this program would be beneficial there and in some of our downtowns and communities where we see this. Again, there's no single answer, but I think this tax change as well as this grant process would be extremely valuable to Vermont in trying to beautify our state and put it to good use. And I believe that again, there are some other opportunities as well. Mike,
I think you covered it pretty well, Governor. I'll step to the middle of the tracks and touch the third rail and talk about permitting very briefly. Part of this is supply and demand. So when you talk about affordable housing with a small a lot of our markets are compressed because folks with means are buying what would typically be affordable housing, workforce types of housing, and they're buying it for cash and because there's no other.
Can you put a price on that? Is that the houses under 300? Is that?
It depends where you are in Vermont,
Right.
but to generalize in
Yeah,
Vermont,
okay.
yes. So it's supply and demand. We have 50 years of not just Act 250, but of permit evolution that has created a system that is difficult to navigate. It's very expensive to navigate, and it doesn't produce predictable results. So we think there's an opportunity to modernize that process, achieve the results that we set out to preserve. As I came through the Moortown Gap coming down the backside, the way the light was, snow-capped mountain and then a green field, and the trees weren't quite there yet, but I mean the vista was spectacular. We don't want to break those things because that's what makes Vermont Vermont. However, we do have downtowns and village centers and corridors and industrial parks and airports and places where it makes sense to build. So creating a balance of preserving our environment, making sure we're doing smart development, but at the same time creating some better, more predictable, more affordable pathways to develop in places where it makes sense will help not only in housing but in business growth and making our communities more vibrant. And again, weaving all of those things back
Can I
together.
pick up on this point? So in this community, we've got probably the best water system in the whole of Vermont. It's no chlorine in it, and it's from an aquifer. And we have a huge amount of capacity. What we don't have is wastewater. One of the areas that the state could reduce regulation, and I don't mean in terms of reducing the quality of managing the wastewater, but there are advanced treatment systems that other states allow that we don't allow in Vermont. And there are also systems that the state allows for camps, etc., that have very small footprints that aren't allowed for larger houses. I think in our community especially, and I suspect in other communities, if there was an advanced treatment wastewater system change within A&R, we could actually have more downtown housing.
Can you, like, can you build that a little bit and illustrate it for us, using Irisville as an example, because I know it's your backyard.
When I was on the planning commission, we developed a plan to do high-density housing, 4-story housing, with TRDs. We actually stopped that plan because the people of Waitsfield voted against the big pipe wastewater system. So without wastewater, you can't have high density. But we have a lot of wetland in Irisville, in this area, and there are systems throughout the country that actually use wetland as part of the area for wastewater treatment. So this is where I don't have the technical ability, and I'd like to bring in an expert,
Julie Beth.
Julie Beth Heinz. But I think that's an area that would be well worth investigating.
Because, well, I was thinking about the infill development plan that existed that talked about taking this area from where we are down to historic Waitsfield Village and creating increased density so that you could have first floor businesses, second and third floor housing,
Yeah.
and interconnected with walking paths and bike paths, and creating almost like an arts hub down near Lawson's. And it got hung up, it's wastewater.
Yeah.
Right.
We're finding that with the other communities as well, and I wish Secretary Moore was here. Julie Moore is an engineer by trade, so she's well versed in this. We were in Wolcott for one of our capital for a day in Loyal County. We talked about this very issue in Wolcott, coming up with a proposal, and so again we'll obtain some more information.
In Wolcott.
Well,
How
Wolcott.
many people are in Wolcott?
Oh, it's actually.
Is it a bigger town than I
It's
think?
bigger than you think. And
Well, that's
That's
a
where
good
Pioneering
tagline.
Seeds is.
Yeah, where Jasmine's from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and they're growing actually.
Wow.
So I mean, and it's one of those communities that has seen better times, right?
Yeah,
I see those
as you drive
everywhere
by, yes.
in Vermont, and that's what's frustrating, and that's why we want to be able to, why we have downtown incentives and grants and tax advantages and so forth, because we feel as though the Charlestons of the world, the Reddings of the world, and the Wolcotts of the world deserve a chance too. What we've seen in Vermont is we have arguably about 13 counties that could use some help. Chittenden County is doing okay. Could it do better? Certainly. But the other 13 counties, the rural areas of our state, are suffering. And when we go on these capital for a day, we hear from them loud and clear. They feel as though they're forgotten. But when I go to Rutland, they feel forgotten. When I go to Bennington, they feel forgotten. When I go to Brattleboro, they feel forgotten. When I go to Springfield, they feel forgotten. St. Johnsbury, the Northeast Kingdom, and so forth. They're all just frustrated because of the lack of economic opportunity and the lack of people.
Do the new, or the proposed Act 250 regulations speak to experimental wastewater?
Depends on which ones you're talking about. We have a bill that we're trying to have heard in the legislature that I think there's some common ground with some environmental groups on our proposal that would actually, and Mike can talk about this in more detail, but he alluded to this, that looking in the development areas, looking at the downtowns, looking and alleviating some of the burden of that, the regulatory burden of some of those communities, when we all agree that where the development should occur.
Right, infill development in our already existing.
And it's just,
Right.
again, we have it.
Which
So-
goes to sustainable government as well. For each additional mile of road or electric infrastructure or water, sewer, whatever we have to build, we're upside down as soon as we build it. To say nothing of the ability to maintain it. So it just makes sense from an investment, from a pure good government financial perspective as well, not just the land use and not just the needs of our downtowns and village centers. It all kind of crashes together to.
But the root of the problem really is our stagnant population. We have more deaths than births in this state. not exactly a recipe for economic success when you think about long-term. And we're one of the 3 oldest average age states in the country. So what that means is when we see we have 30,000 fewer kids in our schools than we did 20 years ago, we came from 103,000, we're down around 73,000 now in our public schools. That's like the canary in the mine shaft here. This is a problem. And when we have workforce challenges, when we don't have enough working families here and the workforce, that puts the burden on the rest of us. So when we talk about not just the cost of housing, but how do you maintain the housing? What about the taxes? I know, property taxes are a big deal here in the valley. And so why is that? Well, when we look at, we have 30,000 fewer kids, and we have an education system that's a great education system. It could be even better if we focus on maybe a cradle to career system where we're investing more in early care and learning, so building that good foundation, and think about the kids instead of becoming so nostalgic about change. That we could build a system that would be an attraction for people to come here. So having said that, with the cost of education rising, the number of kids actually decreasing, it puts the burden on property owners here in our state.
It does. We're struggling with potentially closing an elementary school here, and my staff, we sit every week around this table and we talk about, well, which one should it be? Is it the one with the lowest education? Is it the one with better septic that can accommodate more kids? Is it the one with the water? Is it the one with the kitchen? And we spend extensive amounts of time talking about, well, if we had no elementary schools and no high school and no middle schools, what would we do? If we were starting from scratch, where would we start? It's a struggle.
Yeah.
The struggle is real, and it's real at this table, and if we can't sort it, we find it's not surprising. Katie's our education reporter. It's not surprising the school board's struggling.
Well, again, if we're starting from scratch, if we were looking at our education system as it is today, and we were starting over, and we decided that we were going to give someone a check for $1.8 billion to educate our 73,000 kids, I would dare say that it would look much different than it does today.
Yeah.
Because they would have a clean slate. I mean, obviously we can't do that, but I would envision that it would be more about early care and learning, and more higher education as well, and looking at the whole continuum, because they're all connected. And so the more I feel, the more we can invest in early care and learning, the better off we're going to be on the other end. So, but we have to start at some
We have
point.
to start.
Can I beat the horse a little bit on the housing still?
You can beat the housing. I mean, it's all connected. So
It is all
it's the
connected,
same
right?
thing.
So, the strategies of working on dilapidated homes, great for different communities. And I see a lot of value in that. It's not something that's going to work here. We don't have those. Any of those have been rehabbed, and they're being sold for $500,000, and then we talk constantly about density, and of course that's best case scenario, but we talk about it so much we're not talking about subdevelopments outside of the valley, and that's our own dialogue with the politics here, and that's a problem. But if each of the 3 towns that make up the valley, and 4.5 if you throw in Moortown and Duxbury, we're just to come up with 10 homes, single family homes between $175,000 and $250,000. That's a game changer. I mean, because everything in terms of recruiting, we're spending money to get people to come here, $10,000 a year. I think that's really a clever approach as well. But this is the place they want to be, but they can't afford to be here. So really, what we need to do is have that housing. And it's just about the process, it's streamlining the process, because, there's a supply and there's a demand, and we certainly have the demand, and the supply could meet it if there wasn't so much time and money and effort in that processing.
I was just going to say, my initial reaction is you can't build a house for that, because
Right, and
the
that's what we
costs
hear
are
from
so
developers.
big. Unfortunately, we're doing affordable housing projects that are $300, $350, $360, touching $400,000 per unit for 600, 700, 800 square feet.
Wow.
Affordable housing with like Down Street and VSHA. So
Yes.
how much of that is like kind of administrative? It was just builders,
Yeah.
just developers.
Now you're licking the third rail. I don't think we
Guilty.
have clear numbers on that,
Yeah.
because that system is really detached from what the governor is able to influence. And not just in, that's not a Vermont thing, that's
Right.
a national methodology to how affordable housing has been, is being built today. So
But
we're-
the, go ahead.
I was just
sorry.
going to say, we would love to continue to explore modernizing that process and trying to drive those price points down, in part through things that we do have some nominal influence over, like permit costs, but some of it is the system.
So when you mentioned, Governor Scott, that you had $35 million committed, which leveraged another $65 million, is that for the entire state, or is that Chittenden County? And where's the process on that? How soon does that money trickle
Well,
down, or
again,
is it?
It's starting to. I mean, I've gone to some ground breakings, which is good. We tried to emphasize that this would be workforce housing, and tried to emphasize this would be geographically distributed throughout the state as well, so it's not just in Chittenden County. In fact, I think a couple of the groundbreakings I've had were in Windham County, and maybe in Bennington.
Brattleboro.
But what's that?
We went to one in Brattleboro and Windsor.
Yeah, wait,
Yeah.
River?
Yeah, White River actually is doing quite a bit in terms of housing. They themselves have initiated the process probably a few years ago, but they're well on their way to satisfying the demand that they have. But again, a couple of things. One, going back to the permitting, it's not just we have to be careful. It's not just Act 250. I mean, many times we hear,
Right.
you just got to fix Act 250. We agree that there are some areas of Act 250 that need attention, upgrading. It's been 50 years. We need to take a look at that and not be afraid of change. But at the same time, it's local, it's state, it's federal. It's gotten a lot more complicated.
There's
And
a chart of one possible iteration of the permit process. It doesn't have all of the permutations. But the first few weeks I had this job, basically everyone said, you can't draw that chart. It's impossible. It's too complicated. And we finally found a couple of smart engineers
subdivision
to do
and
it.
PUD and conditional use, right? Because a lot of it's
Yeah.
going to come down to local land use and our smaller. Is it 1 acre zoning, or can you create
Right.
PUDs with 8 units per acre? And Waitsfield's working on Hamlet, what's called Hamlet development. So is Warren, has it in their new town plan.
Yeah,
based
it's
in-
not, so it's
I mean,
not fair
we're-
to just blame Act 250.
Right, no, it's.
Right.
Or
it's
just
sure,
blame the state
sure.
process, because there
But
are
the,
layers.
the
Right,
reality is that if you want to achieve workforce housing, you've got to have existing infrastructure. You've got to be near a road, because the moment you start having to put that infrastructure and roads in place, your costs go
Right, gotta build a
astronomical.
sidewalk.
So
Yeah.
you're better off downtown,
Right.
downtown development.
We see that in Barrie, we see that in Rutland, we see that in many communities where we have second floor opportunities,
Yeah,
and we're moving forward with that. But Montpelier as well.
Right.
So
it's a good example of
Right.
how it works in Montpelier. We could talk about housing all day. I did have another question that I want to throw into the mix, and I'm not going to get into funding for the Clean Water Act, because that's another rail that I
I
don't
think
want
it's
to
that
lay.
same picture.
Right.
Sorry I used that
There's one very
visual.
specific part of it, and that's the state mandates of Act 46 requiring towns to comply with the standards of general municipal road permit. And that has a significant impact here locally, where we have so many steep dirt roads, obviously. How can you help us with that? I don't know which one of you wants to help with that. Start with the one the buck stops.
The one that's not
Yes,
here.
okay.
I'm not familiar with that particular issue. Is it because of the gradation?
Act 40, well, so there's standards for dirt roads,
Right.
Class 4 and Class 3, and that comes out of the Clean Water Act, but it's specifically called Act 64. And it requires, for example, that you reduce the types and amounts of runoff. It's to slow the flow of water from
Right.
up the hill, down the hill, for a bunch of reasons, to reduce erosion and to reduce sedimentation, but to slow floodwaters in the event of a heavy, a flood event. And it's expensive. Towns have to do tricks, especially with their Class 4 roads. They have to
Right.
come up with money. There's some grant money, there's some we were looking at one road in Waitsfield that was going to cost $50,000, and it ended up being $30,000 of grant money, so that's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. You know, there was, and that was state grants, and then I think there's some additional number of a federal grant that could bring that local cost down to something like $15,000.
And we have to be honest as well. I did some touring over the last couple of weeks with some flood damage in
Yeah.
some of the communities, Pittsfield, for instance, Bethel. I know you've had some damage here, and in other regions, if I say up in the Northeast Kingdom. We just went and observed the aftermath of some of that of Irene in Northfield, and they've removed I don't know how many
A
houses.
neighborhood, seven
Yeah, a whole
houses.
neighborhood
Yeah.
has
Wow,
been
a
removed
neighborhood, huh?
now, and they've built this park, and they've recognized that there's going to be flooding almost every year. We saw where there was flooding this year, but they use some of the wetlands, created wetlands, in order to accept the sedimentation, some of the phosphorus and so forth. But it's a reality we have to face with climate change. And so these are real. The Class 4 roads contribute to sedimentation and erosion and flooding and so forth. So I know that Julie with the Agency of Natural Resources is well aware of some of the challenges working with the communities on this issue, because again, if we're going to mitigate and try and prevent some of the flooding in the future, we have to deal with some of the realities we're seeing on the ground. So it's essential that we continue.
And I don't think anybody disagrees that
Yeah.
it's essential. I think it's just in the implementation phase, it's expensive,
Yes,
right?
right.
And we're working on flood resilience throughout the valley with an initiative called Ridge to River, which is really literally just that, a top-down approach from the ridge to the river to slow stormwater runoff and reduce the speed with which water hits the rivers, because that will slow. That gives the floodplain a chance to absorb it. So it's work that's underway, but it's costly.
Yeah, well, as expensive as it is on the front end, we've seen how expensive it
Yeah.
is on the other
Yeah.
end after Irene. So again, that's why it's so critical. That's why we forwarded some of the water quality money when I was first elected into office. We were in a position where we went along with the treasurer and the legislature, worked together and provided for another 70% over previous allotments of dollars for water quality. So we're all committed. We all believe that we need to spend about $50 million
50 to 60 million.
every year to go to projects such as this and others, so that we can clean up our waterways and make sure that we're more resilient to flooding in the future.
Katie, did you have another question?
Yes. So what were your thoughts on the Air National Guard series stories that VT Digger posted? And then as a follow-up, what are your thoughts on media coverage overall in the state of Vermont?
A couple things. One is some of that was eye-opening to many, and the Digger stories. But I have a great amount of faith in our Guard, and I believe that we can do better. And I believe that the new Adjutant General has pledged to do better, and I think that he's showing that. And again, we need to learn from our mistakes of the past. So from that standpoint, I'm ready to work alongside them. But anyone who puts themselves in danger, runs towards a problem rather than away from it, I'm extremely grateful for all that they do, the National Guard in general. So they've helped us out during events like Irene, but we'll get through this and hopefully have a better system. So from that standpoint, I thought it was helpful in a lot of respects. It's not easy when we go through that. But again, it's something that we have to be aware of. So, in terms of overall the media, we're seeing changes in the media throughout the country. It's a new age. I think many are struggling with. When I was growing up in Central Vermont in Barrie, the Times Argus was the paper. The Free Press was the paper, the media source in Chittenden County. And Mike, you grew up there. And I would say the Free Press is just a shadow of itself. At one time, it's probably gone, it's probably a quarter of the thickness of what it once was. So we have new sources of information. And I think we're all struggling to determine how do we use that, and how do we absorb all that, because it's coming at us from all different directions. But all in all, we're trying. I pledged to try and have a weekly press conference where we invite all the media to the either the State House or whatever we're trying to do, and trying to answer questions and be honest about where we're at. So. All in all, I think that I don't like everything that they write, but at the same time, I think it's very helpful. And the more information, the more transparency, the better.
Did you have another quick question?
So not enemy of the people. That's good. Yeah, I have lots more questions. So how are we doing on time? Because I have to admit, do I have to just
we
pick
have
one
about
or?
5 minutes, but they have to be at Yes Tomorrow at noon, right?
Ah.
So I know your questions are not simple, and they're not.
No, nothing you do is simple. I'm really overwhelmed and sad that there's so much happening and it's so difficult. But here's maybe some lower hanging fruit. So where something's possible. The as a community, people they're not going to church as much anymore, right? There's no Granges. We're not connected in the same way, and being rural with transportation issues and different things. The lower, the families I work with, lower incomes, are not connected in the same way, and so there are a lot of issues around this lack of connection. One thing that could make it easier, it's a very small thing, now to volunteer in the schools, you have to be fingerprinted. And so to be fingerprinted, you need to go to the sheriff's office and make an appointment, and et cetera. And I'm wondering if there's a way, maybe this is something I work with my rep to create some legislation or something, where somebody might be certified to do fingerprints, just take them and then send them away to the state police locally, so that this is just one less barrier for people being involved in the schools.
I'll be happy to talk to public safety. In fact, we'll be seeing them this afternoon to determine. I don't know what the process is. I don't know what the possible is. And anytime we can reduce the burden on folks who are trying to help, I think is important. I think mentoring, being role models is more important than ever. I think that's what we're seeing with some, and you're seeing it with some of the families with the opioid crisis and some of the separation of families. More important than ever that we have better role models, and what we're seeing across the country, as a matter of fact, what's highlighted and the way we treat each other is something that's concerning to me. And we should all remember who we are and who's watching us more than anything else, and it's our kids that want to be just like us. So we need to make it easier for people to get involved, because that's what it's going to take.
Robin? It's also a simple, short question. It's going to be like not multi-tentacled.
So the Food Hub is very focused on innovating food and beverage businesses. And we have a massive challenge at the moment in Vermont with dairy farms. And I'd love the administration to put more effort into ag innovation, because not only are we seeing the dairy farmers wanting to retire, we have a very aged population of dairy farmers, but those farms are fairly large, and when you put a vegetable farmer on a dairy farm, there's a lot of unused land. So I think it's really important that farm to plate continue, and we put more effort into ag innovation, because we need a new landscape now.
Yeah, I think that's one of the bright spots in Vermont in some respects. Food quality is something that's important. Could be a draw again for we're seeking to bring more people into the state. Every time we can fill a job or bring more people into the state, means less burden on the rest of us. We want better roads and sewer. We want lower taxes. We need more people. We need more people paying in the system. So every time we fill one of those jobs means a little less burden on the rest of us who are still here. and we're going in the opposite direction. We have been over the last few years. We need to turn the corner. I think that that's a part of the solution. I would say Anson Tebbets, our Secretary of Ag, is very creative.
He's visiting with us across the road at 1
good.
o'clock.
Oh, good.
But-
It'd be an excellent question for him.
Yeah.
He's innovating business by going and tasting the food and giving suggestions.
And I'm going to raise this point with
We're all
him.
very jealous of him on Capitol for a day.
Thank you all very much. We really appreciate you including us, and we're excited about it. And I'm especially excited that you're going to start again
Yeah.
and just go around.
Well, and it
That's
doesn't
great.
mean you have to wait for us to come to you. I mean, if you have any suggestions, if your constituents, your community has an issue, please let us know, because
We will.
we genuinely want to help.
We will.
So-
The accessibility of the people in Vermont government is
So I
noteworthy
remember
thing
when
about
you were
living
a
here.
senator, this goes back to before 2000, in Jay's restaurant across the way. You used to come down to the chamber meetings.
Yes.
And we'd have the chamber, and you and Ann Cummings and
Bill Doyle.
Bill Doyle, that's
Right.
right. Used to come down and join us and listen to whatever rants we
Yes.
had that week.
Very diverse and eclectic crowd
Yes.
here, and that was interesting.
Thank you.
I know you got to go.
Well, thank you
Lunch
very much.
awaits you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Very punctual.